What's up, YouTube? Andy from the Sports Card Flip Game here with the latest on how to get you plugged into all things sports cards. In today's video, we're going to be talking about why sports cards are similar to fantasy sports. We're going to be thinking about daily fantasy sports, traditional fantasy sports leagues, and how in this time where there aren't sports, how sports cards are taking up the mantle to help provide a new boom for the industry, for the hobby, and ultimately to help fill that void so that when sports comes back, the hobby and our collecting will be right there alongside with it. So I'm thinking of 3 specific reasons why investing and collecting sports cards is very similar to fantasy sports. Now, I've been involved in fantasy sports for a long time. I actually started in the late 90s with fantasy leagues, really even before ESPN and Yahoo were big. The internet was just kind of booming a little bit. So I've been involved for that long. Really love fantasy sports. Haven't done a ton of daily fantasy, but you get the idea of what kind of comes around it. I know they're traditionally really big industries. A lot of folks have likened sports cards. Gary Vee likens it to gambling and daily fantasy. I think there are a lot of corollaries to it, and I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I believe that's true. The first is really kind of the strategy aspect of sports cards. Much like fantasy, you have the ability to kind of pick and choose and develop your own strategy around how you want to collect and invest sports cards. So in football, right, you've got the ability to kind of pick your own team and create the makeup of your own team. So for me, I love the Cowboys. I'm certainly going to want Dak to be my fantasy quarterback. I'm going to want Zeke to be my running back, right? I'm going to want the Cowboys D with Leighton Vander Esch and Bo Scarborough on those guys to be on my fantasy defense. You get the idea that you can kind of pick and choose, and there are folks that when you do your traditional fantasy football drafts, they're homers like me and pick everybody from the same team and don't diversify their collection or their team, but you get the idea. What I love about collecting as well is you can go vintage and you can collect guys like Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith, Hall of Fame guys who are always going to be valuable. You can do the what if sports kind of scenario or situation where you could say, hey, I want them on my team just the same. So that's one way to kind of look at strategy. Now in baseball, right, you've got a roster that you've got to amass, and you have to kind of allocate resources to pitchers and hitters, right? Because most of them, whether they're roto or whether they're head-to-head, etc., you've got to allocate accordingly. So looking at pitchers, right, maybe you're going to invest in well-known proven guys, top-end sets like Topps Dynasty, and get a Cole Hamels card with this nice jersey. Maybe you want to prospect and go look at, this is a Yohander Mendez, right, that didn't really pan out. But again, the same way, you can go back and go the vintage route just the same. You can get a guy like a Greg Maddux or Nolan Ryan. These are a little bit more modern or junk era wax cards. That's what I was trying to say. Or you can go into the 70s and go get a Nolan Ryan card from early on, right? There's all kinds of endless possibilities that really make the hobby rich and valuable from a collecting perspective. Now in basketball, right, because maybe it doesn't have quite as long of a tradition, or fantasy basketball, when you think about it, it's much more around scoring. I actually did a fantasy league where we counted technical fouls and ejections and missed rebounds and missed free throws. It was crazy. But I think one of the beauties of modern basketball collecting is actually looking at the different rookie cards for a different player. So you can focus on lower end sets and kind of flip those. These are Revolution and Donruss for Luka Doncic, or if you want to go higher end, right, Prism and Select are always going to be good options. So kind of looking at where you focus your collection is another strategy that comes about, very much similar to fantasy sports. Now, the second piece that I think really hits home today without sports in the market is that sports cards provides a level of entertainment, right? So when sports were on, we were watching the games much more closely because I've got Luka cards or because I've got Dak cards. And some of the things that really drew me into sports cards a few years ago, or back in, I should say, was being able to go find some cards of guys that were on the come up, like Noah Syndergaard or Lucas Giolito, right? Those were not big name guys and maybe aren't still super big name guys, but being able to go find those and keep up with them, right? Fantasy sports was my sport of sort of way back in, and it provided an entertainment value to see where their prices were and to be able to keep up and see if they could kind of grow right alongside them. Now, one of the things I've talked about in a previous video that I think provides an excellent entertainment value for today are group breaks, right? And so I'll link down in the description to a previous video I did about really breaking down the idea of what the group break is all about. And with that, you've got the ability to go look at YouTube, go look at Instagram, other platforms, and find folks breaking product, and maybe you can hit a Giannis tie-dye card like this that's die cut numbered to 25. Now, this is certainly the biggest thing I've ever hit out of a break, but you get the idea that you've got that chase, right? You've got the ability to hit something big. But even if you don't hit something big, here's a Sekou Demboya card that I hit out of another break. Lower end, right? Nothing crazy, but it certainly connects me now a little bit to Sekou, and I say, hey, do I want to collect him? Right? So that thrill of the hunt and the chase is certainly a great entertainment value today. It's kind of similar to what I'm thinking about when I first collected, when I'd ride my bike to the card store. I'd actually, right, get to break open some of those packs and bust those. Coincidentally, my first introduction to fantasy sports was at my local card store. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, the guys were doing it out of the newspaper, and that was their entertainment value back then. And really what I think it harkens back to is what just came out in a Sports Illustrated article about group breaks in specific and how that's creating a sports card boom right now, is that breaks are similar to kind of like the sports bar. In this era where we can't go out and socialize, we're doing it online. We've got the ability to connect with other folks, right? Fantasy sports, a lot of the folks that are in those leagues are guys that I've known for 10, 15, 20 years. Guess what? They're also guys that I'm getting back into sports cards and are talking about, hey, what's this all about? So I think those parallels are very similar to it. And again, it provides just a wonderful outlet to be able to provide a little release and relaxation from what's going on today. And the third and final reason why sports cards are very much like fantasy sports are the analytics side. This is something that I love, getting into the data and really understanding and hopefully predicting a player's future performance is really what fantasy sports is all about, right? Is being able to understand what they're going to do tomorrow. Well, understanding a sports card's price, right, is very much correlated to that. And the better a player does on the court, the better they're going to do in the sports card market. And so understanding, right, like a guy like Kobe White, everybody's been high on him this year. Is he going to become the next Derrick Rose or the next MJ? Remains to be seen, but two great Chicago guards that may really affect his value in the marketplace, I think is really fun to analyze and look at and be able to really put some data behind. Now, one of the other things that I think is really going to help fuel this is when sports return, right? So new folks that have come into the hobby now have these sports cards at their ready. And when we've got sports to actually watch, they're going to say, you know what? Am I going to hold or am I going to sell? So I think we're seeing just the very, very starting point of this craze, and very much like daily fantasy sports, right? You can lose your shirt, but you may just kind of put, $5, $10, $20, whatever it is into it. I think those short-term returns are very similar to the buy and the flip of sports cards. Now, when you start thinking about those folks, and you hear about them, but I don't know anybody who makes a living doing daily fantasy sports or fantasy in general, probably a little bit rarer. That's much more similar, I think, to those folks who invest and invest really hardcore. So that's going to do it for today's video, right? I think this is it. We're really just getting started with this, and I think sports cards are poised to take off very much similar to the fantasy sports market, maybe 8-10 years ago. So leave me a comment down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Right? I would love to interact with you and learn more about your thoughts as this relates to the fantasy market. So if you haven't yet already, subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and do that and hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you can be notified when I've got new content. I'm posting content twice a week. So that's going to do it for today's video. Until next time, keep your flip game strong.